I'll just introduce myself first of all. I'm John James. I'm the Chief Executive of the Sickle Cell Society and want to welcome everybody who is on today's COVID-19 seminar, which will cover vaccination as well. This is the fourth question and answer webinar we've arranged over the last 18 months regarding the impact of the pandemic on the sickle cell community. And I just want to sort of highlight that it's important from our perspective that we give the sickle cell community the opportunity to have any questions about, as it was then, shielding, the pandemic, COVID, vaccination, answered by leading healthcare experts in the field. And on that note, I'm really pleased to say we have an excellent panel of experts to answer questions or concerns that individuals living with sickle cell or caring for anybody with sickle cell have. So I'm going to do those introductions now, not in any particular order, but because Adam's name starts with an A, I'm going to start with Professor Adam Finn. Adam, rather than me introduce you, would you like to introduce yourself? And I'll do the same for David and Mark.
Sure, yes, glad to. Thank you, John. My name's Adam Finn. I'm a paediatrician, so a children's doctor. I'm based in Bristol in England, work at the university and the Children's Hospital there. I'm a specialist in infectious diseases and vaccines. I'm also a member of the JCVI, which is a committee that everyone suddenly now knows about, that advises the government on policy on vaccines. I actually also do quite a lot of work for the World Health Organization and chair their European region technical advisory group of experts on immunisation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. And just for those of you who are not familiar with acronyms, the JCVI is the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisations, which advises the government on vaccinations and immunisations. So thank you very much, Adam. Now, many of you will know David. So again, David, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm David Rees. I'm a paediatric haematologist who mostly sees children with sickle cell disease. I work at King's College London and King's College Hospital in South London. Thank you.
Good, thank you. And Dave is also a medical advisor to the Sickle Cell Society, as is Mark. So Mark, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, John. I'm Mark Layton. I'm a haematologist, primarily looking after adults with sickle cell disease at Imperial College Healthcare.
Thank you, Mark. So that's our panel. We've got a very excellent group of people to answer any questions. But what we wanted to do very briefly is to let you know that over the period of the pandemic, the Society has been working very closely with all of the specialist centres, work led by Mark Layton and other colleagues, because we as a society wanted to understand with evidence what the impact of sickle cell of COVID-19 and the pandemic was having on people who live with sickle cell or care for people who live with the condition. And Mark and his colleagues have been collecting data, real world data, and I thought it would be helpful if we had a short presentation from Mark detailing the data that's being collected, which will give you as an audience a sense of what the impact of COVID has been. And then after that presentation, we'll open it up to questions or any concerns or issues that you want to have clarified about COVID vaccination and where we are today with booster campaigns and everything else. So on that note, I'll hand over to you, Mark.
Hopefully you can see, so I'm just sharing my screen now.
Yes, we can. Thank you, Mark.
So this is a presentation that we gave recently to the National Haemoglobinopathy Panel, and just by way of background, as John mentioned, when the pandemic started, we had really very little information on how people with sickle cell disorders might be affected by COVID-19. There were some assumptions made based on severe influenza that this could be a more problematic infection. And so in light of that, and in view of the need to collect information to try and inform public health policy and decisions around vaccination and management, we started collecting anonymized real-world data in April 2020, and have regularly updated that and shared it with the National Haemoglobinopathy Panel and the collaborative group of haemoglobinopathy coordinating centres who have collected the data itself. And this is just a very quick overview of the data. So just a few definitions with regard to the different waves that we've seen during the pandemic, which many people will be familiar with. These were the timelines that we defined. So the first wave was between February 2020 and August 2020, and then there was a second wave from September 2020 until the end of May 2021, and then lastly the third wave starting in the 1st of June 2021. And we've been particularly interested to see if there are differences between the third wave and the preceding two because of the potential impact that vaccination may have had. Overall, there have been almost 900 cases of suspected or confirmed COVID, and we did include suspected cases because in the early phase of the pandemic, testing facilities were relatively limited, and there were a number of people who presented with classical symptoms of COVID-19 who weren't actually tested at the time. So in the third wave, so far, 171 patients have been reported, and all of these had a positive PCR test. And you can see the different medical conditions down here, the majority being patients with sickle cell anemia. Of these 171 cases, over half have recovered at home, including both children and adults. But 80 patients did require admission to hospital. The majority of these were adults. And unfortunately, a small number of patients, 3 patients, have died as a result of COVID-related illness. One of the questions we were keen to try and address was the impact of vaccination, and still probably too early to be definitive about this, but you can see that amongst those patients who were admitted to hospital during the third wave, who by definition would have had more severe forms of COVID, the overwhelming majority of them were not vaccinated. Some had had a single dose of the vaccine, and only 7 patients who'd been doubly vaccinated were admitted to hospital. So I think this is quite encouraging, and we now have some information on the proportion of people with sickle cell who have received the COVID vaccine, which varies to some extent from one centre to another, but around 60 to 70% of patients have been vaccinated in the UK. So this just shows the evolution of the pandemic and the cases that have been reported. You can see the waves quite nicely demarcated in this, and as of the 4th of November, 875 cases had been reported. These involve all age groups, and particularly in the second and third waves, we've seen a significantly greater number of younger patients, particularly in the 10 to 19 and 20 to 29 age groups. This rather complicated pie chart just breaks down the cases according to their underlying medical condition, and the highest proportion of cases reported, as I mentioned, was in sickle cell anemia, accounting for just over 60% of all the cases reported. And then the next most common would be hemoglobin SC disease, and then transfusion-dependent thalassaemia, the most severe form of thalassaemia. Again, testing was relatively limited, particularly during the early part of the first wave, and only 53% of patients had a positive COVID swab of those reported. That increased to 96% in the second wave and 100% in the third wave, reflecting increased access to PCR testing. Overall, about half of the patients reported have required admission to hospital, which suggests that their COVID illness was relatively severe, or that they developed secondary complications related to sickle cell disease as a consequence of triggered by COVID infection. And that percentage has dropped somewhat, which may reflect an increase in the proportion of relatively milder cases in younger patients in the third wave. Overall, in the first wave, 66% of patients required admission, and in the third wave, 46%. This graph shows a breakdown of the age and gender of patients reported. And we did see a slightly higher proportion of female patients admitted to hospital. Number of interventions were required for patients, including blood transfusions, and of patients with sickle cell disease, adult patients with sickle cell disease, about 26% of them required, a quarter of them required some form of transfusion during the COVID illness. In children, that proportion was lower, only about 16% of children requiring transfusion therapy during the COVID illness. Similar picture in thalassaemia, which I'm not going to say too much about, but again, around quarter of patients required some form of transfusion support during the COVID illness. Patients with thalassaemia may be on a regular transfusion program, and we're not entirely clear how many of those transfusions would have coincided with their normal routine transfusion. Requirement for admission to intensive care for respiratory support was looked at in this group, and overall about 10% of patients required assisted respiratory support, and about 5% required mechanical ventilation. Of the whole group of patients, the great majority, 95%, recovered, but there were a small number, 3% of patients who sadly died. In children, so far we've seen no COVID-related deaths among patients with sickle cell disease or other inherited anemias. And so all of those deaths occurred in adult patients, producing an overall mortality of 4%. Still, 94% of patients have recovered. So overall, the outlook for patients with COVID in sickle cell disease appears to be good. I probably won't say any more, John. I think I'll end there and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mark. That's very helpful. And just to sort of pick up what you said at the end, you know, any death is sad, but the fact that the vast majority of adults with sickle cell have survived is good news, and also no paediatric deaths from the data that you've collected. So thank you for that helpful summary. So I think at this point we can open it up to the audience for questions or points of clarification, either from the overview that Mark has given about the impact of COVID on the sickle cell community, as well as there was a very interesting slide that Mark put up about the number of unvaccinated patients who are being admitted to hospital. So this is an opportunity for questions, which Mark, David and Professor Finn from the JCVI can answer. And this is your opportunity so that we can help you address any concerns or things that are not clear for yourselves or any of your family members. So I will stop there, and I have had a few questions raised for me, but I'll hold those back. So either you can put the questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand and speak, and that may be the best way to proceed. So I'm just seeing if I've got any hands up. Yes, we have. Is that you, Adam?
Yeah, but I don't want to go first if there are other questions. I'm quite ignorant about sickle cell disease, so I've got lots of questions, but put me to the end of the queue.
Okay, then I can see Merle. Hello, Merle.
Hello there.
The West Midlands. Hi. Nice to see you. I hope you're well and your daughter as well.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes, we are both. Thank you. Yeah, just a quick. I might have missed it, but I'm not sure. So those who had recovered after COVID, were they double vaccinated, vaccinated once, or you know? That's the question, really. Those who had recovered in this information, this research.
Yes, so the majority of patients recovered, even in the first wave prior to vaccination. But I think the most relevant observation from the third wave is that the great majority of patients who are being admitted to hospital now are unvaccinated, which by implication suggests that vaccination is protecting people with sickle cell disease from more severe COVID illness or secondary complications such as a crisis, which we've seen triggered by COVID.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Merle. And just to say, the society's position has been to, based again on evidence, is to encourage those in the sickle community who haven't been vaccinated to get vaccinated, because I think Mark's presentation on the data that's being collected shows that it is making a difference. We have another question from Claire. So Adam, I haven't forgotten about you, but I'll let some of the other patients and carers deal with questions. So Claire, fire away with your question.
Hello, thank you, John, and thank you, panel. My question is, I suppose, clarifying. I have had 2 vaccinations, one in January of this year and then April. I did have some side effects, but managed to overcome them. But one of the things that was discussed with me was the fact that the AstraZeneca was a preference for me as opposed to Pfizer. Given the fact that we're now going through the process of a booster, which is actually Pfizer, naturally I've got some concerns that I've raised with my GP surgery, etc., to establish, well, okay, if Pfizer really wasn't a good option for me in the beginning, why is it a good option now for me as a booster?
Good question. Is that one for you, Adam? I don't know, but it could be for anybody. So I'll let that's a good question, Claire.
Thank you.
I'll let the health experts decide who wants to answer it.
Yeah, hi Claire. Nice to hear from you. It's difficult to answer your question without knowing what the reason was that you were advised against the Pfizer vaccine first time around. The main reason that we were cautious at the beginning of the program around Pfizer was that there were a handful of cases of people who had severe anaphylactic reactions, and that led to a cautious approach to the use of that vaccine with people with histories of that kind of problem, although it hasn't actually turned out to be as big a problem in the longer term as we'd feared. But that may, of course, not be relevant to you. The other thing that has determined which vaccines people received broadly is that we used AstraZeneca vaccine much more extensively in the older population, and we've used Pfizer much more in the younger population for reasons that relate primarily to rare side effects that have been described with the vaccines. The booster program is now going forward using entirely Pfizer vaccine, with which we've now had, of course, a massive amount of experience over the last 12 months or so. And the reason for that, apart from the fact that we have very good supplies of that vaccine, is that in the studies we've done, that is the vaccine that reliably produces the biggest and most long-lasting protection. So that seems to be the best choice at the moment, whether people have received AstraZeneca or Pfizer first time around. But if you wanted to come back and have any further information about the reasons you were advised against Pfizer initially, then maybe I can answer more helpfully.
Thank you very much. Claire, did you want to come back?
Thank you, Adam. That was really, really informative and useful. I think for me, it was a combination of, yes, I attend the Red Cell Clinic, but also at my GP surgery, I've had quite a lot of challenges in terms of having the flu vaccine as well. So given all of that, I think that was why they decided AstraZeneca was better for me. But what I found very interesting was the fact that suddenly you're getting the texts of the booster, you're hearing it on the news, and then your anxiety level goes up again. One, because you've had reaction to having the 2 vaccines, AstraZeneca, but 2, the other situation is that you're very concerned because then you're being told you're not covered, even though you've gone through the trauma of having 2 vaccines, that you're now not covered. But actually the one that's even better is the one that you weren't allowed to have in the beginning. So, you know, it just creates anxiety and challenges, lots of questions without any answers. And I think this is a really good platform. I attend the Red Cell at Macmillan's, you know, and they're very good in terms of supporting and providing information. I sent an email saying this is my concern, and they came back and said, you know, it will be okay. But I still, because I haven't had that real engagement and one-to-one conversation with my GP surgery who made that decision, it's quite difficult. So yeah, I really appreciate what you've been saying today in response to my question.
Sure. So just to come back very briefly, both the AstraZeneca and Pfizer vaccines are quite what we call reactogenic, in the sense that they do cause quite a lot of people to have short-term problems, headaches, fevers, feeling unwell, but they only really last for a day or two. They can be quite unpleasant. They're quite common compared to other vaccines, but these are self-limited problems that do settle down. The rare side effects that people are describing, that they're concerned about with the AstraZeneca vaccine with coagulation problems and with the Pfizer vaccine with myocarditis, are extremely rare. So in the context of the risks of COVID, there's a very clear balance in favor of having the vaccines, and certainly most people have gone forward on that basis, and I've certainly gone forward and had immunizations on that basis. As far as the waning is concerned, we are seeing increasing evidence that even though these vaccines are very effective at reducing the risk of serious illness, that protection does begin to wear off after about 6 months, particularly in older people. It's not that it disappears, and having had 2 doses, you are still very well protected against serious illness at this point. But having a further dose or a further vaccine will jump up that protection up to a much higher level in the coming risky months of the winter. So that's why we're advising people who are affected by illnesses that can increase the risk of serious COVID to have that 3rd dose.
Thank you very much, Adam and Claire. There are a couple of other questions. Merle, I'm just checking, that's an old hand, isn't it? I'm just checking. It seems as though it is. I'll take a question from Yamadi Thomas. Thank you, Merle, for removing your hand. And then there are 3 questions in the chat box which I'll come back to. But Yamadi, do you want to go first?
Yes, mine actually carries on from the question that was asked before. Was she called Claire or something?
Claire's question, yes.
It's to do with the booster dose. My question or comment is twofold. One is that people I've spoken to, including myself, were initially worried that you might end up having a different vaccine for the booster to what your initial 2 vaccines were. But I'm glad it's Pfizer, because that's what I took before, and I have my booster booked for next week. So that was one thing that, you know, how do we sort of, you know, make sure we sort of persuade people that it doesn't matter if you take 2 different vaccines. So that's the first question. And the second question or comment is, when I was booking my booster and, you know, going onto the website and everything like that, in fact, I just checked, I saw that the NHS website is actually saying that if people can't take the Pfizer, they will be offered AstraZeneca or Moderna. So that's on the website. So I don't know whether Adam wants to clarify that.
Adam?
Yes, sure. So first of all, on the issue of different vaccines, we've now got quite a few studies coming in, not just from the UK, but from around the world, looking at what happens when you give people different vaccines to the ones they had originally. And broadly, the results are complicated, but broadly what the answer is that giving different vaccines is just fine. We don't see a problem with additional side effects. We don't see problems with reduced protection. And in fact, on occasion, we see better protection when you use different vaccines with a broader kind of antibody response. In terms of the second part of the question, which is that some people can receive AstraZeneca as a booster, that is certainly very much allowed. We don't want people who can't have Pfizer because, for example, they have a contraindication to the vaccine, they've had a serious reaction to it or something, to go without a booster. And we also don't want logistical problems if it arises, for example, that a particular place only has supplies of AstraZeneca and no Pfizer, and people have showed up for boosters, we do want them to be able to go forward and receive them, because we know that boosters of AstraZeneca are also very effective. So that's the reason that it says that can be done if on occasion. But most people will be offered Pfizer boosters when they come forward for their boosters. Thank you.
Now, the latter part of the question was, in a way, trying to see why Claire couldn't get AstraZeneca, because she said she's not eligible for she can't take the Pfizer. So I wonder why she wasn't allowed, offered an AstraZeneca booster.
Yeah, so it seems like maybe the advice that she was given to not receive Pfizer originally may have been precautionary and may in fact not really apply now that we know more about her and about how she got on with the first vaccines and how what we know about the Pfizer vaccine now. But obviously, if there was a reason that she can't receive the Pfizer vaccine that still applies, then AstraZeneca is very definitely an option.
Thank you very much, Yamadi and Adam. I just want to pick up a couple of questions because we have time. A couple of questions in the chat box, and one, Mark, was in relation to the data that you presented as to whether or not there's any information about how many parents have vaccinated their children, and if so, do we know if there have been any side effects for those children who have been vaccinated? So I think there were two questions there. Do we have a sense of the numbers of children with sickle cell who have been vaccinated? And B, if they have been vaccinated, have we or the clinical teams picked up any reported unwanted side effects?
Those aren't data that we've collected as part of this survey, which is looking only at cases of COVID-19. But David might have some information on that.
Well, I can give you my impression of the people we see in clinic, and then I think most people are happy for their children to be vaccinated. I would say probably about half of the patients we see at the moment have got vaccinations, and quite a lot of them have vaccinations booked in the future. We've not seen any significant side effects in children at all. I mean, sometimes the children have, been a bit fluey for 12 or 24 hours, but we've not seen anything, requiring admission to hospital or areas of concern, really. And I think we were worried that people wouldn't be very keen to have their children vaccinated, but in general, that's not what we've seen. There are certainly individuals who have worry about it and have concerns. But as a whole, I think people are, certainly in the patients we see in South London, are embracing vaccination, certainly.
Thank you, David. And then there was another question. Well, good this is, in the sense that Sade has said that the presentation and the answers to the question is given a confidence in taking the vaccine. But part of her question, because of her own experiences and that of her husband, is whether or not vaccination is going to be continuous, as it is like the annual flu jab.
So that's probably one for me. The answer is that we don't really know at this point how things are going to go into the future, because we clearly don't want to be immunizing people unnecessarily, particularly healthy younger people who may already have sufficient immunity to stay well or only get mildly ill. I think the main concern will be in the future for people who are at enhanced risk of serious disease, and that of course includes people with sickle cell disease who we know are at higher risk of serious illness and hospitalization compared to others of the same age. And of course, it very much influences elderly people. The older you are, the worse this infection is. So I think there's a reasonably strong chance that we will see some degree of immunization of the population in the future. But at this point, it's really quite hard to predict how often that will be and who will be targeted for immunization. On a personal level, I would be extremely surprised if we have to go on immunizing everyone in the population every 6 months. I really don't think that's going to be a requirement, but I would equally be quite surprised to see in a year or two's time no one being offered COVID vaccines at all. I think we're quite likely to see re-immunization, particularly of the elderly.
Thank you, Adam. Just there was a related question which you mentioned older people, and I think one of the chatbot question was, can we clarify what we mean by older, over 50s or over 60s, or what we mean? So I'm assuming that you were referring to people over 50.
There isn't a magic cutoff. It's one of those curved graphs that gets steeper and steeper. So the risks of COVID, whether you're a healthy person or you have an underlying condition like sickle cell disease, essentially go up faster and faster the older that you get. It's noticeably a higher risk in adolescents than in young children, in people in their 20s, going up 30s, but it gets very high once you get to be an old chap like me in his 60s, or people who are even older than that. And by the time you're in your late 70s and 80s, it's a really, really risky disease to get, even if you've been immunized before. So age is probably the biggest predictor of serious illness when it comes to this virus.
Okay, thank you very much. Another one. There's a question from Idris, which I'll come back to Idris and see if he's prepared to ask the question, because I think I may have missed his question. But there's another question from Sabrina that says that she had her vaccine but caught COVID 2 days later. And Sade says she ended up in hospital and as a consequence had heart problems, myocarditis symptoms, and she's currently having various tests. And her question is simply, given that, would you recommend to have the booster?
Yes, I would. So if she was taken ill 2 days after her first vaccine dose, that will have been meant that she actually already had the infection at the time that she received the vaccine dose, because it takes 4 or 5 days between when you're exposed to when you develop any kind of symptoms of the infection as a minimum. So the vaccine will not have had any time to provide protection, and she will have been, her immunity will have been stimulated both by the infection and by the vaccine. However, we do know that the protection afforded both by infection and by vaccination is not permanent. It does wane off after time, and the risks increase once you get beyond about 6 months of your most recent exposure. So that's why we're advising booster doses for people who received their second vaccine dose at least 6 months ago.
Thank you, Adam. There's another hand up, but I can't see who it is. So that's to do with my screen, not anybody else. So whoever's put their hand up, feel free to tell us who you are. Just the first name's fine, and your question, please. Unless it's an old hand.
It's Elaine, I think.
Elaine, okay, I can't see you, Elaine. Hello, Elaine. Is that Elaine from Suffolk?
Yes, it's Suffolk, yeah. Hi.
Yeah, hi, Elaine. Good afternoon.
Hi.
Fire away with your question.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. Very interesting. Just had a couple of points. I wasn't clear from your presentation whether you said the 3 that died, were they vaccinated or not?
Sorry, Lynn, I was having trouble unmuting. Thank you. So in the first wave, no patients had been vaccinated. So we have seen patients who've died who have been vaccinated. I think there's been 1 patient who has died who was fully vaccinated. But there was a medical reason why they probably wouldn't have responded well to the vaccine and wouldn't have achieved the protective immunity that the majority of people with sickle cell disease would. So although they had been vaccinated, they fell into this group of people whose immune system is heavily suppressed for one reason or another, either because of their underlying medical condition or because of treatment with drugs that suppress the immune system. And unfortunately, in those patients, the vaccine doesn't appear to work as well. And that's one of the reasons, and Adam may want to comment on this, that it's been recommended those people have a third dose of vaccination to try and boost their immunity, to give them some protection.
My second question was, I have been vaccinated and I've had my text already for my booster, but my second one, I was quite ill, I was just ill with sickle cell crisis, so my vaccination was delayed because I was so poorly. So my second one was 4 months ago, and I was a bit reluctant to have the vaccine in the first place, but I did go ahead. And so it's 4 months ago, and I know the government have brought they're now saying 4 months, but does it matter if I wait the 6 months rather than go now when I've only had the second one 4 months ago?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually the policy is to wait for 6 months after the second dose. So you may have been called forward a little bit earlier for some reason. that doesn't reflect the policy. If you had a second dose 4 months ago, my recommendation to you is that you do wait for 6 months, because if you have the booster earlier, the response you make to the booster may not be so strong, and it may also not, because you're getting it sooner, the protection it will give you will also wear off sooner. So for both of those reasons, assuming you're not in the group of severely immunocompromised or immunosuppressed people, for whom we're advising 3 doses, as Mark was just saying. But if your indication for the vaccine is related to sickle cell disease, you don't fall into that category, then I would advise you to wait for the further 2 months and get your booster at 6 months after your second dose.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Elaine, and thank you, Mark and Adam. Linked to that, there's a question in the chat and this is about phenotypes. I know clinicians can't recommend anything, but is there a particular vaccine that is better suited for phenotype SS?
Well, phenotypes are well outside my expertise, but that there isn't a differential recommendation for different vaccines or different kinds of sickle cell disease. So yeah, I don't think that there is any reason to think that one particular type would need a particular vaccine.
Thank you. Elaine, is that an old hand, Elaine?
Oh, sorry, I'll take it down. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I wasn't sure whether you were coming back. And then a couple more questions in the chat. So Claire has said one of the side effects of the vaccine is enlarged lymph nodes. Is this a symptom that happens soon after receiving the vaccine, or can this happen at a later stage?
It's quite early after receiving the vaccine. It's not immediate, but it occurs during the days following vaccination. It's quite unusual, actually. Most vaccines don't do this. And these are specifically lymph nodes under the armpit on the same side as the vaccine's been administered. So they come on, maybe, if they happen at all, they come on after a week or so, and then they've usually disappeared again by about a month.
Thank you. Thank you. Idris, I don't know if you're still on the call. I missed your question, which you made very early on in the chat, and I seem to have lost it. So if you're still on the call, Idris, do you want to ask your question?
Hello, yes, I'm still on the call. Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask about the figures for hospitalization. And I think, Mark, you said approximately half of those sickle patients that had a PCR positive test for COVID were hospitalized. I just wanted to know, do we know what proportion of those were actually under some sort of active treatment or management program, whether it's apheresis or hydroxycarbamide, etc. Just need to know whether or not having any treatment predisposes you to a more severe form of COVID, perhaps.
Yes, I think one of the limitations of the information that we have is that it has been reported by the hospitals that treat patients with sickle cell disease. So we would know about all the patients who are admitted to hospital, but we probably don't know about all the patients who have an episode of COVID in the community and are managed at home. So I think that figure for hospitalisation sort of overestimates the risk of having to come into hospital, because we're not able to capture all the mild cases of COVID that people have and don't seek medical advice for, or perhaps only see their GP. So in that respect, I think the risk of hospitalisation is probably sort of overestimated in the figures.
Okay.
We are intending to look at what the risk factors for hospitalisation might be in that level of detail, what treatments patients were receiving and whether there is any protective or other impact of specific treatments like hydroxyurea, but that hasn't been done yet. There certainly isn't at this stage an indication that patients with hydroxyurea are more likely to develop severe illness. I think we would have seen that coming through in the data, but we haven't got that information. A couple of things that have emerged, surprisingly, is that there doesn't seem to be a significant difference between the different sickle phenotypes. So those that are regarded as generally more severe, like SS, versus those that are generally milder, like SC disease. And the risk of more severe COVID illness seems to be broadly similar between the two groups, which is unexpected, really, but important to emphasize, because those people with milder disease may feel they're less likely to become severely ill from COVID, or may even feel it's not as important for them to be vaccinated. But the data suggests that the risks are broadly similar across all sickle genotypes. And another observation from the data is that there doesn't seem to be a significant difference between males and females, whereas in the general population there is a slightly greater tendency towards severe illness in males.
Okay. All right, interesting. And in relation to that, also had another question. I think, Adam, you were saying something about how vaccine efficacy wanes after 6 months. But also, I think Mark, you had some data on mortality around 3%. I just wanted to see some comparisons really between the normal population and the sickle population, whether or not that 3% mortality is disproportionately higher in sickle, perhaps, on whether or not the efficacy is in terms of vaccine waning, whether that's equivalent to what you see in the older 70+ population in sickle, or whether it's just there's no information.
So it's very difficult to make those comparisons because the numbers of people with sickle cell disease who have become sufficiently ill to be hospitalized or who have died are very small. So to make comparisons with the general population on rates of waning is quite difficult. Most of the waning data we have are from very large databases that match testing positive with vaccine records. The majority of those people obviously don't have sickle cell disease. So we have to extrapolate to some extent from immune responses. What we know about sickle cell disease in terms of immune responses is that the susceptibility to infections, if you like, is more related than anything else, we think, to the fact that people with sickle cell disease, the function of the spleen, which is one of the things that the spleen does, is to enhance your ability to make immune responses to infection, can become progressively reduced. And so that may change over time with people with sickle cell disease. So we kind of extrapolate from that to assume that people with sickle cell disease may make less good protection when they receive vaccines, which is why we advise them to receive the vaccines early and to receive, to encourage people to get the boosters now they're available. But I can't really answer your question with honesty because we don't have comparative data that can really tell us how the waning compares between sickle cell disease and everybody else.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you both.
Thank you both very much, Idris and Adam, for that. There was a question, we've got about 6 or so minutes. There was a question that was put to me earlier, and it was partly due to the announcement of the antiviral new treatment that was announced either yesterday or the day before. And the question was, is that new treatment going to mean that vaccinations stop? This is a tablet that I'm told also prevents serious illness, but I don't know the detail because it was only announced yesterday. But the question was, is this new treatment going to mean that vaccination stops?
No, it won't. This is very much a new development. We are hoping that this will help in 2 ways. One is that for people who get sick, either unvaccinated or vaccinated and end up in hospital, this may add to the treatments that we have available to improve their chances of making a recovery. And there may also be individuals who are incapable of making a good immune response to a vaccine, who have been exposed to the virus and are at very high risk of getting sick. And they may also be candidates for receiving treatment, even in anticipation of getting sick. But of course, a drug like this doesn't provide you with long-term protection against the virus. It's only going to help for as long as you're taking the drug. That's in contrast to vaccination, which gives you much more longer lasting protection, as we've been discussing, for at least 6 months and beyond 6 months to some degree. So the protection that vaccines can provide to individuals and to the population is much greater than you can achieve using a drug.
Thank you, Adam. So we've got time for at least 2 more final questions, and I can see from the chat, which is chatting away, that various exchanges and peer support about dietary supports is going on in terms of what people are finding helpful. So that's good to see. So let's take a couple of final questions. And Elaine has certainly got her hand up. And whilst Elaine is answering her question, if anybody else has any burning questions for the panel, please take this opportunity to raise your hand or put it in the chat. So back to you, Elaine.
I just want to have clarification on the answer that was given to Idris about the fact that our spleens aren't functioning. Did you say that that might therefore mean that we have a low response to the vaccine?
Okay, I think what I might do is defer to one of my colleagues who are sickle cell specialists on this, because they may have other insights. But in principle, the reason that we identify sickle cell disease as a high-risk condition is because it is one of those conditions which can affect the function of your spleen. I don't know if David or Mark.
Or David?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, the spleen stops working from a very early age in sickle. From in the first year of life, there's pretty much it stops working well as an immune function organ. And it's certainly true that sickle patients patients with sickle cell disease do respond to vaccines, and there's lots of studies, not with the COVID vaccine, but showing that vaccination works and you make antibodies in the same way, and it offers protection against serious infections. But I agree with what Adam says. I don't think the studies have been done, but it seems likely that if you have sickle cell disease, you may respond a bit less effectively to the COVID vaccines. But obviously, there's still very likely to be significant benefit. But I guess it makes things like the question of having a booster even more important.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, David, for that clarification. Elaine, did you want to come back, or is that
Sorry,
okay?
I'm sorry.
Go on.
No, that's fine. That's
Oh, right. Okay. That's
yeah.
fine. Okay. Any, I'm just looking at the, see if there's any more, apart from the dietary questions. So let's take one final question. I don't think there's any in the chat. So any final questions from the audience? I can't see any. And there's just a, oh yes, there's one final
It's
one.
just me. I just saw,
yeah,
somebody
we'll
else.
take one final question from me, Amity. Thank you.
It's just to ask Adam whether, you know, when you've had the vaccine and all that, you're wondering what your antibodies, you know, whether you've built enough antibodies. Is there a way in the future that, you know, somebody could find that out by a blood test and go and just for their peace of mind? Or
yeah, it's an important question. What you're talking about is the thing that we call a serological correlative protection, which basically means an antibody test that you can do that tells you whether you've made a protective immune response. We're still working on this with the COVID vaccines. We don't really have yet an answer that is useful on the individual level, although we've now got to a point where when we put the results of many people together and compare different vaccines, we can begin to correlate the protection that those vaccines provide and predict it from the immune responses we see over a large number of people. But at this point in time, doing antibody tests after you've had the vaccine is not a reliable way of predicting whether or not you're protected. And the best we can say is that 2 doses of vaccine gives you very good protection in the short term, but a 3rd dose is needed once you get beyond 6 months to get that protection against serious disease back up to tip-top levels.
Thank you very much, Adam and Amity. And that takes us to 5 o'clock. So I want, on behalf of everybody, but just to say a big thank you to our panel. Yeah, a big thank you to our panel, Adam, David, and Mark, for answering the questions so clearly, and certainly from the chat we can see it's been helpful and certainly has given confidence to some individuals about the booster. So on behalf of all of us on the call today, thank you all very much. And thank you for logging on and asking some very interesting questions. And on that note, I know it's cold outside and it's cold inside where I am at the moment, but on that note, I'm going to wish you all a pleasant weekend and thank you very much.